Welcome yet to another powerful and lovely story. If you're still new to my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Also, don't forget to like, share, and comment with your name so it will be used in our next story. Now let's dive straight into our story. The night in downtown Chicago was unusually bright for a stormy evening. Streetlights reflected off wet asphalt, turning the entire street into a glowing ribbon of gold and silver. Rain had stopped just minutes earlier, but the air still carried that fresh, electric silence that follows heavy weather. Cars passed slowly, their headlights cutting through the mist like searching eyes. Inside a small apartment building tucked between two older brick structures, Rebecca Stone was finishing another long, exhausting day. Her apartment was modest, too modest for someone who once dreamed of something bigger. A slightly worn couch sat against the wall, a small kitchen that barely separated from the living space, and a window that faced the dimly lit street below. Nothing fancy, nothing luxurious, just survival. Rebecca stood near the sink, washing a single mug. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had learned how to keep going even when life offered no comfort. She had gotten used to silence, used to empty evenings, used to being alone. Then, a sound broke through it. Knock, knock. It wasn't loud, not aggressive, but it was firm enough to cut through the quiet like a warning. Rebecca paused. Her hand slowly lowered the mug into the sink. For a moment, she didn't move. In neighborhoods like hers, late-night knocks were never simple. They usually came with trouble attached. She wiped her hands on a small towel and walked toward the door, each step slower than the last. The hallway light outside her apartment flickered slightly, casting a pale glow through the small peephole. She leaned in. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the empty corridor outside. Then she adjusted her angle and froze. A child stood there. Rebecca opened the door immediately. The moment she saw him clearly, the world seemed to sharpen. He was young, no more than 10 or 11. His clothes were expensive, a navy blue coat tailored far beyond anything a child his age in this neighborhood would wear. Clean shoes, neat hair, though slightly disheveled from what looked like stress rather than weather. But it wasn't his appearance that unsettled her. It was his eyes. They were alert, too alert, like someone who had seen something he wasn't supposed to understand. And yet, he was alone. The hallway behind him was empty. No footsteps, no adult voice, no rushing parent, no security guard, nothing, just him. Rebecca stepped slightly forward, instinctively lowering her voice. "Are you lost?" The boy didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder toward the stairwell, as if expecting something or someone to appear at any second. Then he looked back at her. "I need somewhere to stay," he said quietly. His voice was controlled, too controlled for his age. Rebecca frowned slightly. "Where are your parents?" A pause. That question landed heavily. The boy's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, gripping the strap of a small backpack that looked just as expensive as his coat. Rebecca noticed something else now. His hands were trembling slightly. Not from cold, from fear. She stepped aside without fully understanding why she was doing it. "You can come in," she said gently. He hesitated for a second longer than necessary, as if weighing whether entering was more dangerous than staying outside. Then, slowly, he stepped inside. Rebecca closed the door behind him. The click of the lock sounded louder than it should have. Inside the apartment, the boy stood still, scanning everything. The worn furniture, the simple walls, the dim kitchen light. It was clear he wasn't used to spaces like this. Rebecca studied him carefully. "What's your name?" she asked. Another pause. "Mar." "K," he finally said. Mark Bright. The name sounded like it belonged to a different world entirely. Rebecca nodded slightly. "I'm Rebecca Stone." Mark didn't respond beyond a small nod. He remained standing, not sitting, as if sitting would make him vulnerable. Rebecca gestured toward the small couch. "You can sit down. You're safe here." But at the word safe, something flickered across his face. Not relief, uncertainty. He sat anyway, but only at the edge, like someone ready to stand and run at any moment. Rebecca went to the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, though her mind was already working through possibilities she didn't like. A child like this doesn't just appear at your door. Not in a city like Chicago. Not alone. She placed the glass in front of him. "Mark," she said softly, "I need to call someone. Your parents, or—" "No." The word came out instantly. Sharp. Firm. Final. Rebecca stopped. Mark's hands tightened around the glass, but he didn't drink from it. His gaze stayed fixed somewhere near the floor, avoiding her eyes now. "I can't go back," he said quietly. Rebecca felt a shift in the room. Something heavier than before. The kind of silence that doesn't come from emptiness, but from fear sitting in it. "Why not?" she asked gently. Mark didn't answer. Instead, he stood up again and walked toward the small window in her living room. He looked outside, staring at the street below. Rebecca followed his gaze. Everything looked normal, quiet, calm. But then she noticed it. A black car, parked across the street. Its engine was off, but its headlights were still on. Mark saw it too. His entire body stiffened. Rebecca stepped closer to the window, her heartbeat slowing into something heavier. "Is that—" she began. But when she turned back to ask him, Mark was already looking at her. And for the first time since he arrived, his voice dropped into something almost like a whisper. "They found me," he said. Rebecca's breath caught. Outside, the black car remained still, its lights burning quietly through the night. Morning arrived in Chicago with a pale, softened light that slipped through Rebecca Stone's curtains like something hesitant to fully enter the room. The black car she had seen the night before was gone, but the feeling it left behind was not. Rebecca stood by her kitchen counter, staring into a half-empty cup of coffee she had forgotten to drink. The silence in her apartment felt different now, no longer peaceful, but occupied, as if the space itself had started holding its breath. From the small couch in her living room, Mark Bright sat quietly. He hadn't slept much. That much was obvious. His posture remained rigid even in rest, like his body didn't fully trust relaxation. His expensive coat was folded neatly beside him, and he had insisted on keeping his backpack within arm's reach all night. Every few minutes, his eyes would drift toward the window, checking the street below without saying a word. Rebecca noticed everything. She didn't question him immediately. Instead, she did something simple, something human. She made breakfast. Nothing elaborate. Toast, eggs, a glass of orange juice placed carefully on the table in front of him. "You should eat," she said gently. Mark looked at the food, then at her, as if weighing whether accepting kindness came with consequences. After a pause, he picked up the toast and took a small bite. Rebecca sat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city outside slowly came alive, distant sirens, passing cars, morning chatter from the street below. But inside the apartment, everything felt contained, like they were in a separate world entirely. Finally, Rebecca broke the silence. "You stay the night," she said carefully, "but I need to know what's going on. Someone must be looking for you." Mark didn't respond immediately. He finished chewing, swallowed, then set the toast down. "I told you," he said quietly. "I can't go back." "That doesn't answer anything," Rebecca replied. His fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. A small, controlled reaction, but she caught it. There was something trained in the way he held himself. Not natural fear, conditioned fear, like someone had taught him what to avoid saying. Rebecca leaned forward slightly. "Are you in danger?" That question made him pause longer than the others. His eyes shifted toward the window again, then back to her. "I'm safe here," he said instead. Rebecca exhaled softly, not satisfied, but careful not to push too hard. Something about him made it clear pressure would not open him up. It would shut him down. So she changed direction. "Okay," she said. "You can stay today, just until we figure out what to do." Mark nodded slightly, but didn't relax. That was the first day. By the second morning, he was still there. Rebecca found him awake before her again, sitting in the same position, as if he had barely moved during the night. The city outside was brighter now, sunlight reflecting off glass buildings in the distance. But inside her apartment, the mood remained unchanged. Mark had not touched his backpack. He had not asked for anything. and he had not used her television, her phone, or anything that might connect him to the outside world. Rebecca noticed that too. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" she asked softly. "I slept," he replied. It wasn't convincing. She studied him for a moment longer. There were small details she couldn't ignore anymore. The way he flinched when a door slammed in the hallway outside. The way he froze when her phone vibrated on the table. The way his attention constantly tracked sound instead of sight. It wasn't ordinary anxiety. It was anticipation, like he expected something to happen at any moment. Rebecca moved to the kitchen again, giving him space but not distance. She had started doing that instinctively, balancing presence without pressure. Still, the questions kept building in her mind. Who was this child really? And why did a black car feel connected to him? Later that afternoon, Rebecca tried again. She sat across from him, her tone gentler this time. "Mark, I can't just keep you here without knowing anything. Even if you don't want to go back, someone has to know you're safe." At the word safe, his expression tightened. Rebecca noticed immediately. "I could call child services," she added carefully. "Or the police. They could." "No." The reaction was instant. Too instant. Mark stood up abruptly, stepping away from the couch like the idea physically disturbed him. His breathing quickened slightly, controlled but sharper now. Rebecca raised her hands slightly in a calming gesture. "I'm not trying to scare you," she said. "I just need to help you the right way." His eyes flickered. No longer calm, no longer distant. Something deeper surfaced now. Fear, but not of her, of what she was suggesting. "They can't help me," he said. Rebecca frowned. "Why not?" Mark shook his head once, sharply. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand," she insisted softly. Silence stretched between them. Outside, a car horn echoed faintly in the distance. Mark reacted immediately, turning toward the sound, shoulders tense, as if expecting something to follow it. Rebecca saw it clearly now. This wasn't just a runaway child. This was someone trained to react. Someone conditioned to fear systems meant to protect him. "I'm not calling anyone until you tell me what's going on," she said more firmly, but still gentle. Mark stepped closer to the window again, scanning the street below. Nothing unusual, just normal Chicago life moving forward without them. But his tension didn't ease. Instead, it deepened. Finally, without turning around, he spoke. "Please don't call them," he said quietly. Rebecca softened slightly. "Then talk to me." A long pause. Mark turned his head, just enough for her to see his expression and profile. And then, in a voice that carried more weight than his age should allow, he said, "No." A beat. Then he repeated it, stronger this time. "They can't find me." The third day arrived with a heavier kind of silence in Rebecca Stone's apartment. Not peaceful silence. Tense silence. The kind that settles in when something unspoken has taken residence in a space that was never meant to hold it. Rebecca stood at her small kitchen counter, sorting through a stack of unpaid bills. Electricity notice, rent reminder, late fee warning. The papers looked ordinary, but together they formed a quiet pressure she had learned to live with. Still, today, even that pressure felt different, because now there was another presence in her home. Mark Bright sat on the couch behind her, perfectly still. He had not asked for breakfast yet. He hadn't spoken much since morning. His backpack remained beside him like a permanent fixture, untouched, as if it contained something more important than anything in the room. Rebecca sighed softly, folding the papers back into a messy stack. She was used to struggle, but she wasn't used to responsibility that didn't belong to her. Outside, the city of Chicago was already awake. Delivery trucks passed. People rushed to work. A normal American morning unfolding without hesitation. But inside Rebecca's apartment, everything felt paused. Then came the first disruption. A knock, not on her door, but on the shared hallway wall, followed by a neighbor's voice, loud enough to carry. "I swear, I saw a kid going in and out of there yesterday." Rebecca froze slightly. Mark's head turned instantly toward the sound. Too fast, too alert. His entire body shifted like he was recalibrating danger levels in real time. Rebecca walked toward the door, opening it just enough to see her neighbor, an older woman from across the hall, holding a grocery bag and eyeing her curiously. "You got family staying with you now?" the woman asked. Rebecca forced a small smile. "Just a guest." The woman didn't look convinced, but she nodded and moved on. When Rebecca closed the door, she exhaled slowly. But the feeling didn't leave. Later that afternoon, the landlord arrived. He didn't knock politely. He knocked like someone expecting trouble. Rebecca opened the door to find a middle-aged man with a tired expression and a clipboard in hand. "Miss Stone," he said immediately, stepping slightly into the doorway without invitation. "We need to talk about occupancy." Rebecca's stomach tightened. "Everything is fine," she said carefully. He glanced past her shoulder into the apartment. And that was when Mark appeared in the background. Just briefly, but enough. The landlord's eyes narrowed. "That's a child," he said flatly. Rebecca stepped slightly to block the view. "He's just staying temporarily." The man sighed, scribbling something down. "Rules are rules. Extra occupants mean adjustments. You need to clear it or file proper documentation." Rebecca forced calm into her voice. "I understand." But as soon as he left, the pressure in her chest didn't ease. It only grew heavier. Back inside, Mark was standing by the window again, watching the street. Not casually, constantly. Rebecca noticed the pattern now. He didn't just look outside. He scanned it, like he was searching for something specific that might appear without warning. She approached slowly. "You keep looking out there," she said. He didn't turn. "It's important." "What is?" No answer. Instead, his eyes narrowed slightly, focusing on something across the street. Rebecca followed his gaze. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Just parked cars. People walking. A normal afternoon rhythm. Then she noticed it. A black car. Parked farther down the street than before. Same shape. Same polished exterior. Same stillness. But now it was closer. Rebecca frowned slightly. "Is that the same car?" Mark didn't respond immediately. His hands tightened faintly at his sides. "Yes," he said finally. A single word. Heavy. Controlled. Rebecca stepped closer to the window, trying to see inside the vehicle. The windows were tinted too dark. Nothing visible. But something about its presence felt intentional. Like it wasn't parked. It was positioned. She turned back to Mark. "Why would someone follow you like that?" she asked. His expression shifted slightly, but not toward her. "Toward the car." "They don't follow," he said quietly. "They monitor." Rebecca frowned. "Who are they?" Silence. This time, he didn't answer at all. Instead, he stepped away from the window abruptly, as if looking at it too long increased risk. Rebecca's mind started working faster now. This wasn't random. This wasn't a lost child situation anymore. There were patterns, presence, distance, control, and fear, not of being heard immediately, but of being found. That evening, Rebecca tried to return to normal. She made simple food, turned on the television for background noise, tried to create something resembling stability in a situation that was clearly unstable. But Mark barely ate. He kept glancing toward the window every few minutes. At one point, a car passed outside with loud music. Mark flinched so sharply that the fork in his hand slipped onto the plate. Rebecca noticed immediately. "That was just music," she said gently. He didn't respond. Instead, he pushed the food slightly away. "I'm not hungry," he muttered. But Rebecca wasn't focused on the plate anymore. She was focused on him. The reactions weren't random. They were learned, conditioned. This boy wasn't just afraid. He was trained to anticipate something. And that meant someone had shaped that fear. Later that night, Rebecca stood by her window alone. The apartment was quiet again. Mark had fallen asleep on the couch, though even in sleep his posture remained tense, like rest was something temporary. Outside, Chicago was calmer now. Fewer cars, softer lights. But Rebecca's attention was locked on the street across from her building. And that's when she saw it clearly. The black car was still there. But now, it was closer than before. Parked directly under a streetlight. Still silent. Still watching. Night fell over Chicago in a slow, uneasy way, as if even the city was reluctant to settle after the tension of the past days. Inside Rebecca Stone's apartment, the usual warmth of evening lights did little to soften what was now an unspoken weight between her and Mark Bright. The boy had barely spoken since morning. He sat on the couch, knees slightly drawn in, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. But Rebecca had learned by now. He was never truly staring at nothing. He was always listening, always tracking, always aware. Rebecca stood near the kitchen counter for a moment longer than necessary, watching him quietly. Something had changed in her. At first, she had seen him as a lost child, then a frightened one. Now, she wasn't sure anymore, because fear didn't usually look this controlled, and children didn't usually carry silence like a shield. She finally moved closer. "Mark," she said softly. He didn't look up immediately. "Yes." Rebecca hesitated. She had been careful until now, gentle, indirect, patient. But patience was starting to feel like avoidance. "I need you to be honest with me," she said. That made him lift his gaze. Not fully, just enough to acknowledge her. Rebecca continued. "This isn't normal. People don't watch a child from a black car for no reason. You don't react to sounds like you're expecting danger every second. And you don't stay silent unless you've been taught to stay silent." The last line landed differently. Mark's expression tightened slightly. Rebecca stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I'm not going to hand you over to anyone," she added. "But I need to understand what I'm protecting you from." A long pause followed. For a moment, it seemed like he might refuse again, like he might shut down completely, retreat back into that careful silence he had mastered. But then something shifted. His hands moved slowly from his lap to the edge of the couch. And for the first time since he arrived, he didn't look toward the window. He looked directly at her. "I didn't run away because I was lost," he said quietly. Rebecca didn't speak. She didn't interrupt. She only listened. Mark swallowed slightly. "They told me I was supposed to stay somewhere safe," he continued. But safe wasn't what it felt like. His voice lowered. It felt like being watched all the time. Rebecca's chest tightened slightly. "Who?" she asked carefully. Mark hesitated. That hesitation said more than words. His gaze flicked toward the window instinctively, then back to her. "They don't like questions," he said instead. Rebecca frowned. "Who doesn't?" But Mark was already pulling back mentally, as if he had crossed a line he shouldn't have. His breathing grew slightly uneven, controlled but strained. "I shouldn't be talking about this," he muttered. Rebecca stepped forward. "Mark, listen to me." "No," he interrupted sharply. The sudden edge in his voice startled her. He stood up, not aggressively, but quickly, like sitting still had become dangerous again. "I'm here because I left," he said. "And I left because I didn't want to stay there anymore." Rebecca softened her tone again. "Stay where?" Mark shook his head. For the first time, frustration flickered across his face. Not anger, but conflict. Like part of him wanted to explain, and another part was physically preventing it. "I can't say everything," he admitted quietly. Rebecca studied him closely. "What can you say?" He hesitated. Then, slowly, as if each word cost something, he spoke again. "There are places you don't leave normally," he said. "Not if they decide you belong there." Rebecca's mind struggled to connect the meaning. "Decide?" she repeated. Mark nodded faintly. His voice dropped further. "And if you leave without permission, they don't just look for you." He stopped. His jaw tightened. He looked down at his hands. Rebecca's pulse quickened. "Then what?" she pressed gently. Mark finally looked up again, and what she saw in his eyes wasn't confusion. It was fear that had been held in too long. "If they find me," he said slowly, "everything gets worse." The room went quiet immediately after that. Not empty quiet, heavy quiet. The kind that settles in when words don't finish their meaning, but still manage to change everything. Rebecca stood still, processing it. This wasn't just a missing child situation anymore. This was containment, control, escape, and consequences. She took a step back slowly, as if trying to create mental space to understand what she had just heard. But before she could respond, a faint sound cut through the apartment. Click. Rebecca froze. Mark froze too. Both of them turned toward the door at the same time. Silence followed. Then, another sound. Lower this time. Subtle, like a handle being tested. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. She moved quietly toward the door, motioning for Mark to stay back. The handle shifted again, slowly, carefully. Not a knock, not a mistake, an attempt. Rebecca's heart began to beat harder now. She stepped closer to the door, her hand hovering near the lock, unsure whether to call out or remain silent. From behind her, Mark whispered something barely audible. "They're here," he said. Rebecca turned slightly toward him, her expression tight. But before she could ask what he meant, the handle turned again, this time more firmly, and the door began to move. The door didn't open. It stopped, just slightly, caught by the lock Rebecca had secured minutes earlier. The handle remained still for a moment. Then slowly it released. Silence followed. Rebecca stood frozen a few steps away, her breath shallow, her mind racing through possibilities she didn't want to name. Behind her, Mark Bright hadn't moved at all. His presence felt smaller now, as if he were trying to disappear into the room itself. Seconds stretched. Then, knock. The sound was calm, measured, completely different from what had come before. Rebecca frowned slightly, confusion mixing with fear. Whoever had tried the handle moments ago was now knocking, politely. That shift was unsettling. She glanced back at Mark. His eyes were fixed on the door, his expression no longer just tense, but resigned. "Stay back," Rebecca whispered. He didn't argue. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped forward and reached for the door. Her hand hovered over the lock for a brief second before she turned it. The click echoed louder than expected. Rebecca opened the door, and everything changed. Standing in the hallway was a man who did not belong to this building. He was tall, composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark coat that looked untouched by the outside world. His posture was straight, his presence controlled, and his expression carried a calm that wasn't comforting. It was calculated. Behind him, the hallway light seemed brighter, almost sharper, outlining his figure with a clarity that made him impossible to ignore. But it wasn't just his appearance. It was the way he stood there, like he already knew everything, like he had never been uncertain, not even for a second. Rebecca's instincts told her immediately. This man wasn't here by accident. "Good evening," he said. His voice was smooth, controlled, not loud, but carrying authority without effort. Rebecca didn't respond right away. "Can I help you?" she asked carefully. The man's gaze shifted past her just briefly, toward the inside of the apartment, toward Mark, then back to her. "I believe you already have," he replied. A subtle tension ran through Rebecca's chest. "Who are you?" she asked. A pause, not hesitation, deliberate pacing. "My name is Dennis," he said. Nothing more. No last name. No explanation. But the way he said it made it sound like it should already mean something. Rebecca stepped slightly forward, instinctively blocking the entrance. "You can't just show up here," she said. Dennis didn't react to the resistance. Instead, his attention shifted again, this time fully past her. "Mark," he said. The name landed heavily in the room. Behind Rebecca, Mark didn't respond immediately, but his silence confirmed everything. Rebecca turned slightly, looking back at him. "You know him?" she asked. Mark stood slowly. His posture was different now. Not relaxed, not defensive. Contained. "Yes," he said quietly. Rebecca's chest tightened. She turned back to Dennis. "You've been following him," she said. Dennis didn't deny it. "We've been ensuring his safety," he corrected calmly. Rebecca frowned. "By sitting in a car outside my building?" Dennis held her gaze. "By maintaining distance," he said, "until I could assess the situation properly." There was no apology in his tone. No urgency either. Just control. Rebecca felt something shift inside her. This wasn't a desperate parent searching for a lost child. This was something else entirely. "Why didn't you just come sooner?" she asked. Dennis's expression remained unchanged. "Because I needed to understand why he came here," he replied. Rebecca blinked. "What do you mean?" Before Dennis could answer, Mark spoke from behind her. "I didn't want to go back," he said. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. Dennis's gaze moved to his son. Not harsh, not soft, measured. "I'm aware," he said. Rebecca looked between them. "Someone needs to explain what's going on," she said firmly. Dennis stepped forward slightly, not entering yet, but closing the distance just enough to shift the balance of the conversation. "Your assumption," he said calmly, "is that you found a lost child." Rebecca didn't respond, because that was exactly what she had assumed. Dennis continued, "That is not the case." A pause. Then, My son is not lost, he said. The statement settled heavily in the air. Rebecca's heart slowed slightly, as if bracing for what came next. He left, Dennis added. Her eyes widened just slightly. He ran away, she said. Dennis shook his head once. Ran implies disorder, he replied. This was a decision. Rebecca glanced back at Mark. He didn't deny it. From what? She asked. Dennis took a breath, not out of uncertainty, but as if choosing how much to reveal. From a life structured for him, he said. One designed to protect, guide, and prepare him. Rebecca frowned. That doesn't sound like something a child would run from. No, Dennis agreed. Not under normal circumstances. Silence followed. Rebecca studied him carefully now. You're not telling me everything, she said. Dennis didn't argue. Instead, he looked past her again, at Mark. Then back at her. You offered him shelter, he said, without knowing who he was, without knowing the consequences. Rebecca felt a flicker of defensiveness rise in her chest. He needed help, she replied. Dennis nodded slightly. Yes, he said. He did. A pause. Then his next words came slower, more deliberate. You didn't find him, he said. Rebecca's breath caught slightly. Dennis held her gaze. He chose you. The statement shifted something fundamental in the room. Rebecca turned toward Mark again. He didn't look surprised, which meant he knew. You came here on purpose? She asked him. Mark hesitated, then nodded once. Rebecca's thoughts began to rearrange themselves rapidly. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't random. Out of an entire city, he had chosen her door. She turned back to Dennis, her voice quieter now, but stronger. Why? She asked. Dennis's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened slightly. Exactly, he said. A brief pause. Then he looked at her, fully this time, as if assessing her in a way that went beyond the surface. And now, he continued calmly, I need to know why. The next morning, Chicago woke beneath a clear, bright sky. Sunlight poured over the glass towers downtown, turning the city into a field of gold and silver reflections. From Rebecca Stone's apartment window, everything looked almost unreal, clean, sharp, luminous. But inside, nothing felt simple. Dennis had not forced Mark to leave. That, more than anything, unsettled Rebecca. After the confrontation at her door, he had remained calm, almost impossibly so. No raised voice, no demands, no threats. Instead, he had offered something unexpected. A conversation, not in the hallway, not in her cramped apartment, but at his home. At first, Rebecca had refused. Then Mark looked at her and said quietly, Please come. So now, less than an hour later, Rebecca sat in the back seat of a sleek black sedan moving through downtown Chicago, sunlight streaming across the leather interior in bright bands of light. Mark sat beside her, silent as always. Across from them, Dennis remained composed, his attention shifting occasionally between his son and the city beyond the window. Rebecca stole a glance at him. In daylight, he looked even more striking. Perfectly tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, every detail controlled. It wasn't arrogance that defined him. It was restraint. He carried himself like a man used to being obeyed, but not one who enjoyed displaying power. That distinction mattered. The car finally turned through iron gates and entered a private estate just outside the city center. Rebecca's breath caught. The house, no, the mansion, rose in front of them in bright, polished stone, its wide glass windows reflecting the morning sun. It was modern, elegant, and almost intimidating in its perfection. Security personnel stood discreetly near the entrance. Cameras tracked the driveway. Everything about this place whispered protection or imprisonment. Rebecca couldn't yet decide which. Inside, the lighting was warm and bright, spilling across polished marble floors and high white walls. Art lined the corridors. Fresh flowers stood in crystal vases. The entire space looked immaculate. Too immaculate. Too untouched. Rebecca turned slowly, taking it all in. This is where Mark lives? She asked softly. Dennis nodded. Mark said nothing, but the silence around him felt heavier here than it had in Rebecca's apartment, as if the walls themselves were familiar enough to suffocate. Dennis led them into a sitting room flooded with natural light. A long wall of windows overlooked the city skyline. Sunlight poured in so clearly that every surface glowed. Rebecca sat carefully on the cream-colored sofa, feeling almost out of place. Dennis remained standing. "I owe you an explanation," he said. Rebecca met his gaze. "Yes, you do." For the first time, something almost like weariness touched his expression. "Mark's life has been carefully structured," he said. Rebecca frowned. "Carefully structured?" Dennis folded his hands in front of him. "Private tutors, security, limited public exposure, monitored schedules, controlled environments." Rebecca stared at him. "You mean isolation?" The word landed between them. Dennis didn't immediately reject it. "That depends on perspective," he said calmly. Rebecca glanced at Mark. The boy had moved toward the windows, staring out at the city below with an expression that wasn't wonder. It was distance. That alone told her everything. "How long has he been living like this?" she asked. Dennis answered quietly. "Since his mother passed away." The room fell silent. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "That explains something. Not everything, but something." Dennis continued. "After losing her, I made decisions based on protection." Rebecca looked at him carefully now, and for the first time, she saw beyond the billionaire image. He wasn't cold. He was grieving in a way that had calcified into control. Everything in this house suddenly made sense. The security, the structure, the surveillance. A man trying to protect the one thing he had left. But protection, she realized, had turned into confinement. Later that afternoon, Rebecca walked through the house with Mark. Bright corridors, perfectly arranged rooms, a private study, a music room, a learning suite with expensive technology and shelves of books. Everything a child could need, except freedom. Mark paused near a closed door. "That's the room they were preparing," he said quietly. Rebecca frowned. "Preparing for what?" He hesitated, then finally answered, "My future." Rebecca looked at him, confused. "What does that mean?" Mark looked down. "They already decided what school I would go to, who I would meet, what company I'd work for one day, even what city I'd live in." Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. "He's planning your whole life?" Mark nodded once. "I wasn't running away because of the house," he said softly. "I was running away from becoming someone I didn't choose." The words hit Rebecca deeply. This wasn't a child escaping danger in the usual sense. This was a child escaping ownership. That evening, Rebecca found Dennis alone in his study. Bright ceiling lights cast a clean glow across the room. He stood near the large window overlooking the city, his posture still and thoughtful. Rebecca stepped inside. "We need to talk." Dennis turned. "I assumed we would." She didn't sit. Neither did he. "What you call protection," she said, her voice steady, "feels like fear." Dennis's expression remained calm. "Fear of losing him," he said. Rebecca nodded. "I understand that." A pause. "But you can't protect someone by deciding who they're allowed to become." For the first time, Dennis looked away. Not angry. Reflective. Rebecca stepped closer. "He's lonely, Dennis." His jaw tightened slightly at the use of his name. "He doesn't need a perfect life," she continued. "He needs a real one." Silence stretched between them. Rebecca expected resistance, expected him to defend himself. Instead, Dennis remained quiet. Then slowly, he turned back to face her. His voice, when it came, was lower now. Not defensive, honest. "Then show me," he said. Rebecca blinked. Dennis held her gaze, something quieter and more vulnerable beneath the restraint now. "Show me a better way." Evening settled gently over the estate, but unlike the tense nights before, this one carried a quiet clarity. The sky above Chicago glowed in soft shades of gold and fading blue, the city lights beginning to flicker alive one by one. Inside the mansion, every room remained brightly lit, perfect, polished, untouched. And yet something had shifted, not in the house, but in the people inside it. Rebecca Stone stood alone near the wide glass windows of the sitting room, her reflection faintly visible against the glowing city beyond. Her mind was no longer clouded by confusion. Now it was filled with something more difficult. A choice. She could leave. Go back to her small apartment. Back to unpaid bills, quiet evenings, and a life that, while difficult, was familiar. Or she could stay. Step into a world that didn't belong to her. A world of control, influence, and decisions that shaped lives before those lives had a chance to breathe. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. She didn't turn immediately. "You're thinking about leaving," Dennis said. His voice was calm, but quieter than before. Less guarded. Rebecca exhaled slowly. "I'm thinking about what happens if I stay," she replied. Dennis stopped a few steps behind her. "And what do you think happens?" he asked. Rebecca turned now, meeting his gaze directly. "I think everything changes," she said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them felt different now, not tense, not uncertain. Aware. Across the room, Mark sat on the edge of the couch, watching them, not interrupting, not speaking, just waiting. That alone made Rebecca's heart tighten. He wasn't watching like a child. He was watching like someone whose future depended on the outcome of this moment. And in a way, it did. Rebecca walked slowly toward him. Mark looked up immediately, searching her face for something he couldn't quite name. "You don't want to stay here like this, do you?" she asked gently. He shook his head without hesitation. "I don't want everything decided for me," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. Rebecca knelt slightly in front of him. "You won't have to," she said softly. Mark's expression shifted just a little. Hope. Careful, fragile, but real. Then he asked the question that mattered most. "Are you leaving?" he said. Rebecca didn't answer right away, because the truth was she hadn't fully decided until that exact moment. She looked at him, then at Dennis, then back at him again, and something settled inside her. Not impulsive, not uncertain. Certain. "No," she said. Mark blinked once, as if making sure he heard correctly. Rebecca's voice softened. "I'm not leaving." The room went still. Mark's shoulders lowered slightly, the tension easing in a way Rebecca hadn't seen before. It wasn't full relief, but it was the beginning of it. Behind them, Dennis remained silent. But his silence was no longer distant. It was observant, present. Rebecca stood again, turning toward Dennis. "I'm not staying for your world," she said. Her tone was calm, but firm. "I'm staying for him." Dennis held her gaze. There was no offense in his expression, no resistance, only understanding. "I didn't expect anything else," he replied. That answer surprised her. Slightly. But what surprised her more was the absence of control in it. For the first time since she met him, Dennis wasn't directing the situation. He was allowing it to unfold. And that changed everything. Later that night, the three of them sat together in the same room. No tension, no confrontation, just presence. Mark sat between them, quietly flipping through a book he hadn't been forced to read. Every now and then he glanced up, not out of fear, but out of habit slowly beginning to fade. Rebecca sat on one side, relaxed in a way she hadn't been in days. Dennis sat on the other, his posture still composed but no longer rigid. At one point their eyes met, just briefly. No words, but something passed between them. Respect, understanding, and something quieter beneath it. Something not yet defined, not rushed, not spoken, but real. The night deepened. The city lights outside shimmered endlessly, reflecting against the glass walls of the mansion. Inside, for the first time, the space didn't feel like a place of control. It felt like something else. A beginning. Not perfect, not fully healed, but honest. Rebecca glanced at Mark, who had finally leaned back against the couch, his eyes growing heavy. Safe. Truly safe. Then she looked at Dennis again. He wasn't looking at her this time. He was looking at his son. And in that moment, she saw something she hadn't seen before. Not power, not control, but a man learning. Slowly, carefully, learning how to let go without losing what mattered. And maybe, just maybe, they were both learning. Together. This wasn't where their story ended. It was where something real finally began. Sparkles, but this is only the beginning. Because love, trust, and change don't happen overnight. And the real test is still coming. Back in Index Pointing Right in Part 2, everything will be challenged. Mark's freedom, Dennis's control, and the growing connection between two people from completely different worlds. So if you want to see what happens next, stay with Golden Love Stories, because the next chapter changes everything. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment part 2.